Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all well. Hope you're all staying safe in these troublesome times, which are hopefully about to end. My name is Neil Nagwekar. I am project lead for the Homemaker series at tellmeyourstory.biz. That's tellmeyourstory.biz. And this is, I think, the fifth session of the Homemaking Talk series. So we have come quite a way. In our last session, we spoke with Advocate Flavia Agnes. It was a quite informative session. It was about the legal redressal mechanisms for abused women. That is a more political legal standpoint of things. Today we will explore a more literary viewpoint of things. This is the last session that will explore the term homemaker in a very conventional sense, in the sense of women or in society or participants that literally create a home. However, the topic for this session is unhomely spaces, culture clashes, and poisonous silver spoons in the company of strangers. In the company of strangers, of course, is Awais Khan's novel. Hi, Awais Khan. I hope you can hear me well.
Hello, Neil. Really nice to be here, and I can totally hear you fine. And
Oh,
it feels really nice to be here.
that's great. Let me just take a minute to introduce you because Awais has done a lot of things. He's a graduate, first and foremost, at the University of Western Ontario and Durham University. He has studied creative writing at Faber Academy in London. He is the author of the critically acclaimed bestseller In the Company of Strangers, published by Simon and Schuster. This is the book we'll be talking about today. He has given lectures on creative writing at Durham University, American University in Dubai, Canadian University in Dubai, United States Educational Foundation of Pakistan, etc. He has appeared in the Adult Review, The Hindu, The News International, Daily Times, and many other publications. He has appeared on BBC World, Voice of America, PTV Home, Spice FM, etc. So, otherwise, a very huge laundry list of achievements here, but of course, we need to focus our thoughts on the book In the Company of Strangers. While I was reading this book, of course, this book is about so many things. Primarily, it's in Lahore, but it's about a huge class of people, different genders, different professions, different conflicts, and of course, they escalate towards the end. So, the first question that I want to throw at you is that we live in a sort of postmodern time where death of the author is a famous concept these days. And what the author says is not as important as perhaps what the reader takes from the text. Having said that, what did you intend to be the main takeaway for your readers from this book?
That's an excellent question. Thank you so much, Neil. I think when I was writing In the Company of Strangers, I wanted to show that at the end of the day, nothing is perfect. Nobody is perfect, and that life, no matter how many privileges you may have or whatever, how much privilege you may have, life is never perfect. So that was the final takeaway, that what you see, like for example, for a layperson, you may see the protagonist Mona in her flashy cars and spending all that money and everything, but it may look like she's happy, but if you dig deeper, she's not happy at all. So I think that was the takeaway, that what you see is not always the truth, that nobody's life is perfect no matter how much privilege they have. So yeah, that was, I think, my
You know,
the takeaway.
you mentioned Mona and how she has flashy cars and she has materialist pleasures, basically. Not to simplify it, but I'm curious to know that if a person is born in a upper class, perhaps upper middle class family, and they have all these pleasures, and they don't want for food, clothing, shelter, these
Hmm.
kind of things. Of course, she's desperately unhappy. You know, I think there is a quote in chapter one, if I'm not wrong, which says that people would laugh at her if she told them that her home felt like prison. So, could you expand on what factors was it particularly that created this unhomely space for Mona?
I think there were several factors, to be honest. If you've read In the Company of Strangers, you'll realize that Mona lives in a house where she inhabits that house with her mother-in-law. So, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so it was a she has a very domineering mother-in-law. She has to put up appearances for a lot of people. She has to put up appearances for her friends, for her husband's friends. She has to attend parties even though she doesn't want to. So all of these things affect her state of mind, and it all goes against her mindset in a very basic way, which makes it all very hard for her. So for someone else this might be the dream life, but for her that is it. This is an unhomely life because this is not the kind of life she had ever envisioned for herself, and this is the life she finds herself in, and that makes her very frustrated.
That's very true. I think perhaps one of the major factors, if not the only one, is her marriage with Bilal. And I was interested to know where, what, what were you trying to say through their marriage? Because I think a common trope in writing would be that if you want to show a woman is unhappy in a materialistic upper middle class society, a good way of doing that is so that she's in an arranged marriage. But clearly, Mona and Bilal marry out of love, not to give too many spoilers on the subject. So I'm interested to know the dynamic between Mona and Bilal. Does it exacerbate her condition, her
So
depression?
yeah, so Mona and Bilal's marriage is like the is a striking example of the toxic patriarchy that sort of exists in both India and Pakistan and Bangladesh in our part of the world. So it's yes, initially he serenaded her with all these gifts and all his attention and everything, but slowly he revealed himself for what he was, which is that he was a sort of a narcissistic, not exactly a sociopath, but he was a bit of a narcissist. So and also the fact that he was all very abusive. I think that is the one thing that made her terribly unhappy, that her husband was not only verbally abusive but also physically abusive. And it's how over the years, it's not you're right, a very common trope is to show a woman in an arranged marriage and an unhappy arranged marriage. But what I really wanted to focus on was that it wasn't always unhappy, you see. So it's not like she's always unhappy. There are times when she finds herself returning, she finds herself feeling some sort of affection for her husband, but then he does something, he acts a certain way or he tortures her a certain way that all that affection is wiped out. So and then I sort of write from his perspective as well, that what drives him to do this to his wife. So I think that all of that, it's a mix of a lot of things, which is what marriage is. I think marriage is like a very is a mess of different things. It's never a very clean, marriage is never clean, so there are lots of factors at play and everything. So I think that all informs the reader's opinion about Mona and Bilal and how their marriage operates. So yeah.
It's interesting if you view it in the as the institution of patriarchy, because I think we get only one perspective of Bilal in this book. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, and in that you see some glimpses of how this was ultimately a man who was raised in a society where men are
Yeah.
preferred to men in many cases. So he's used to getting what he wants,
Yeah.
you know. So I'm interested to know, perhaps from a male standpoint, how do you start to break past these barriers of you have been brought up in a particular way, you have been taught that this is the normative way for men to behave in. How do you sort of break past these barriers of patriarchy? As I think
uh,
Bilal, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, no, thank you for the question once again. I think it's incredibly difficult for a person who has been raised in a certain way and who's used to getting his way. I think it's very difficult for that to go away, and it won't happen overnight. So, what I think the best way to do this is to raise our children right. So, what we teach them in their formative years is what informs their character. So, I think that Bilal wasn't raised properly, and he was probably very spoiled as well, since being a son, and we all know what being a son means in this part of the world. So, yeah, so he's probably raised to getting his way and everything. So, sort of so with Bilal, it was like I said, toxic patriarchy at play. But then again, I wanted to show that there are shades of gray in every character. And so that's how I portrayed Bilal, and that's how I portrayed Mona as well. Mona was not a perfect character either. Mona is very flawed as well. So it was like a marriage of two flawed people, and how it sort of just, how those fireworks go off because it's like two flawed people coming together. But yeah, I think it's if person has been raised a certain way, then it is very difficult for them to throw away that personality. But I think with repeated exposure to certain practices, they can go forward towards the right path or whatever. So, but I do think that it's very important for us to raise our children right. That's the only way that we can get rid of this kind of mindset in our part of the world.
True. And raising our children the right way is, I mean, it's easier said than done. Because
Exactly. Yeah, because there's so much more than the parents. You see, it's about the entire environment around us. So that all of that informs the child's behavior as well. So you're right. It's easier said than done. But I think if the parents take the first step, then at least the child will know this is the right path. Then they can probably differentiate between what they see in the environment around them and what they learn from their parents, and they'll be able to differentiate between right and wrong. Whereas if they're only taught what's wrong, then they'll believe that wrong to be right, which is what
mm,
we've come to with this toxic patriarchy. So yeah.
of course, toxic patriarchy is not something that can only be assigned to men. In that, there was a passage which I'm going to read out here that really stayed with me, which is said by Mona's mother-in-law when she says, "Back in our day, as in it's the good old days or something like that. Back in our day, we earned a clap of a heeled shoe on our buttocks if we bad-mouthed in front of our elders. A sharp slap on the face too, for good measure. We knew better than to sass-mouth our mothers-in-law after that. A woman simply cannot be so headstrong. She has to learn when to keep her mouth shut in front of her husband." This is an example of a woman maintaining the status quo of a patriarchal society.
Yeah.
I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yes, absolutely. I wrote, even though the mother-in-law is a very strong character, but even she is not free from all these shackles that bind her to the older traditions. You see, so so yeah, so when she says that you have to be subservient to your husband and everything, she actually means that, because for her, as she's grown up, she's been taught that once you wrap your husband around your finger, that's the only way you're going to get power. So they weren't taught the idea of independence, and that's the kind of pain that they're inflicting. And also, it's the fact, I think, in women maintaining the status quo, is that those women have been so impoverished, and they've been treated so badly in their youth, that they're like, why should we treat anyone any better, because we have suffered so much, so why shouldn't we make those people before us suffer? So I feel that that was the kind of person that her mother-in-law was, but she was also, again, it was a bit of a shade. There were shades of gray in her character as well. So that's what I wanted to show, that in our society, there's like nobody's completely good and nobody's like 100% bad. There's like a lots of things happening, a lot of stuff going on that sort of informs their behavior. So yeah. So, but
You
yeah,
know,
you're right in saying that some women do maintain the status quo that way, and that is why things it's even harder. It makes everything even harder to achieve.
I think this idea of there not being an absolute good and an absolute bad may lead us to think that there is sort of a relative good and a relative bad. And I sort of read this section as Mona's mother-in-law saying, "Okay, I was beaten, I was etc. etc. Uh, but look, I have food, clothing, shelter. Look, it
Mm,
could always be worse, you know." It's that
yeah,
sort of attitude that stuck with me. Um, there is a clear mix of two cultures here. On the one hand, you have, say, the Western idea of a materialist society, and on the other hand, you have orthodox tradition coming
yeah,
from religion or something similar. So, Tell us more about the curious differences you notice and you noted in the book when it comes to the amalgamation of these two cultures.
Yeah. Well, I think to be honest, both of these cultures, they are in some way. I think there's a lot of greed in both of them. Like for example, in the rich people, they're after money and everything, but the orthodox people are after. They have a greed of a different kind. So they want to control people's behavior and they want them to think a certain way. So that is the kind of greed they're after. So I think greed is a major factor that determines both of these cultures. And yes, you're right. Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, they're all at a crossroads right now, and there's a tug of war between the modern and the old traditions. So yeah, so that was I my intention was to shine a light on what was going on in our country, in our part of the world, without offering any sort of, like, a resolution or anything. I wanted to provoke outrage. So which you must have noticed yourself that there's several ways to write a story. So my way was to provoke outrage, to show that this is what goes on in our society. Even though people are rich, even though they're extremely privileged and seemingly educated, there's still so much going on behind closed doors. So that was what I was trying to show, that even though they're modern, they're still steeped in those old notions of toxic patriarchy and shaming and all sorts of misogyny and all sort of all these sorts of things. So yeah, so while we are at a crossroads and there is a tug of war, but both of these cultures have a lot in common, which is kind of what's going on in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh right now. So I think it's probably, I don't know if it's making us better people or worse people. I have no idea, but yeah, that is what I tried to explore in the Company of Strangers.
There are contradictions in these two
Yes,
cultures as well. You know,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
um, like I'm thinking of how I think this is again in the first chapter itself, or maybe the third chapter,
Hmm.
where there is one of Mona's friends says that not wearing lipstick is the extent to which he follows the Quran.
Yeah.
And I think, on the one hand, a materialist culture will provoke greed, will provoke individualism.
Hmm.
But say Islam is about, part of Islam is about donating. Quran literally means surrender. So how do humans sort of live with these two very clear contradictions? I think is also part
Uh,
of.
yeah. I think life in itself is a contradiction sometimes. So yeah, I think human beings are very capable of living through contradictions, and there's a great deal of hypocrisy that goes on in our countries. So I think it's just like I said, that we are all flawed as people, as humans. We're all flawed. So no, like for Shabina, I think that was Shabina. So her way of making a religious statement was not wearing any lipstick, but she had threaded her eyebrows, and she had sort of she wore good clothes, she wore jewelry and everything. So yes, so she was, it was a bit of a contradiction. What her statement was, a bit of a contradiction. But then again, I think as we progress towards a modern society and individualistic society, I think it's very important for people to be allowed to be themselves. So I think that's what most of the people in the Company of Strangers were. They were allowed to, like for example, Shabina wanted to be religious, but she also wanted to follow the latest fashion trends. Then she should be free to do so. So yes, while there are all these contradictions and everything, but I feel that hopefully we are moving towards a society where there is more freedom of choice, and there are people who will be able to live the way they want to live. So yeah.
This is sort of my rub with modern civilization in general, because we promote individualism, we promote private property, we promote
Yeah.
uh, upper middle class ideals. But I think there's a great contrast between Mona and Ali in this regard, especially because of where they begin. You know, Ali begins. I think the story starts at the hospital where he's looking for his brother, and as it progresses, there is a scene where he's chatting with his mother and his brother, and they seem much happier. They seem much more like a family when you at least compare it with Mona's side of the story.
Yeah.
And the question that I'm sort of building up to is that, do you think that the more wealth we gain, or the more freedom or individualistic or these ideas we get the more and more, do you think that makes us unhappier?
Uh, Not necessarily. You see, it doesn't have to be that way. There are a lot of people who have a lot of money and they're very happy, and there are a lot of people who have very little money and they're still happy. So I think it's all a part of how we are as people. It depends on our personality. So if we're the kind of people, if I'm like, for example, for me, if I'm the kind of person who is happy with whatever money he has, then I'll have a happy outlook towards life. I will, I'll be a nicer person, I guess. But if I am greedy at heart, if I am like really money minded or whatever, so no matter how much money you give me, at the end of the day I'll still want more. So I think it all boils down to our personality, and it has nothing to do with how much money you have and how unhappy you are. A lot of people say that the more money you have, the more unhappier you get. I think it's probably due to the fact that the more money you have, the more problems you seem to have as well, be it business problems or any sort of trivial problems as well. It's like something is going wrong with the house, this needs repairs, this needs work, this needs that, get that car, hire this person, hire that person. So think there's a lot of pressure when you're very rich. But
I do
apart
think
from
that
that,
the
yeah,
richer you get, perhaps your expectations get higher, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
When, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just thinking of this quote that I read a while ago.
Hmm.
When you eat caviar every day, it's hard to turn to sausages, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, I think, in fact, the very first chapter uh, has a small has a small line where Mona served some food with the lids. You know, it's directly coming from the cardboard boxes,
Yes.
and she says that with the lids thrown back and the food ensconced inside, it
Yeah.
looked like something a middle class family would serve, and she rolls her
Yeah.
eyes at that. You
Yeah.
know, so it's
Yeah.
like, how is this? How is this something worth rolling your eyes over?
I know, you see, yeah, that's what I was saying, that, it seems like the richer you get, the more, the more you get involved in these trivial little things. So I was like, so this was actually an observation that I personally seen this happen in one with someone. So I used that as an example, but yeah, it just beggars belief that, these kind of small things determine how that person feels. So they could probably there are probably people out there whose entire mood would be ruined by this one transgression for them. So you're right. So the more money you have, the more complicated it becomes, and the more you get affected by these trivial things. So yeah,
uh, let's not talk about maybe happiness, because that's
it's
a
a relative
hard,
concept. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
a hard concept to define as well. How about empathy? Do you think
Hmm.
that uh, do you think that the more wealth a person accumulates, the lesser emphatic they become? Again, in
uh
the context of this book.
I think so, actually. As far as In the Company of Strangers is concerned, I did feel that way when I was writing these characters. That yes, they did become less empathetic as they became richer, and the more and I think that could be, again, once again, these things are all relative and
Mm.
depends on the circumstances. But I do feel that in the context of In the Company of Strangers, that the richer the people were, the more money minded they were, the more ruthless they became, and the less they cared about other people's emotions, other people's lives. Even like, for example, even in the first or second chapter, there's news of a terrorist attack that's just happened, and the women are just basically faking it. They're just faking concern, and as soon as they see those shawls, they forget all about the bomb blast, and they're totally engrossed in what's going on
Mm.
with the shawls and everything. So I think that you're right, that it does sort of reduce your empathy somewhat, because you are surrounded by so many glorious, expensive things, and people who sort of beg, and people who sort of sycophants maybe, you're sort of surrounded by sycophants, that you sort of, I think that the feeling that makes you human sort of evaporates with the passage of time. So yeah, I think you're probably right.
I This is probably what's the most interesting thing for me about In the Company of Strangers, that Mona and Ali come from two completely different backgrounds, completely
Yeah,
different surroundings, but the their love story, as it were, is a huge chunk of the book. And of course,
yeah.
without giving many spoilers away about how exactly it happened, could you shed some light on how two completely different people, you know, rather aged, it has to be said, how are they drawn to each other? What are the factors?
Um, like they say, opposites attract. So that it could probably be that, but also the fact that I think at some level, Mona and Ali were going through similar things. Not really similar, but their state of mind was very similar. So they were both very dissatisfied by what they were doing in life. So that was actually the basic platform which sort of brought them together. The fact that they both were very unhappy in their lives. So when they connected and when they started speaking to each other and when they started meeting, they realized that how similar they were despite their very different circumstances. They sort of were similar to each other in that, and that's why they found common ground. And when you find common ground, then you sort of become good friends, and for them that feeling sort of blossomed even more, and it became something that resembled love for them. So yeah, I think that for me, when I was writing this book, I totally felt like it was a case of opposites attracting to getting attracted to each other. So yeah.
In their relationship, the fact that
Hmm.
two people from different walks of life
Hmm.
can fall in love, or can
Yeah.
sort of really relate to each other.
Yeah.
Are there any morals in how a class category, a culture, even an individual can sort of get past their closed logic? By closed logic, I mean, I think the prologue with the suicide bomber has an interesting snippet where the person is thinking about should he really do this, and then
Hmm.
he tells no, this is Shaitan telling me that this is Shaitan telling me, trying to deter me from
Yeah.
what is you
Yeah.
call me, as it were. So this is a sort of closed logic. You can't really argue with that, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, so I was wondering if there were any flashes in this book. This is sort of a closing question here. Where there can be any morals in how you can sort of relate to other people, get past your own closed logic.
Yes, absolutely. I think uh, at the end of the day, even as not just as characters of the book, but as people in real life, we all, if we want to do better, if we want to be better, we'll have to transcend our beliefs. So for men, especially men like Bilal, they would have to transcend their misogyny and the way they believe in order to be a better people, and that's what he does. Oh, okay, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but yeah, so yeah, I do think that yes, people will have to transcend those their beliefs, their mindset, their thinking in order to be better people, and that's what In the Company of Strangers is all about. It shines a light on grim practices, and it also sort of shows how they try to be better people, but some of them fail entirely on that. Some of them succeed a little, some of them succeed more. So it's kind of like that. But yeah, I totally think that as not just as characters, but as real people, we can and we should get better with the passage of time. Yeah.
I do think that to succeed at changing or to fail at changing might be two
Yeah.
absolute adjectives. Perhaps it's a process of becoming rather than being.
Exactly. No, absolutely. That's actually a very good thought. It's a work. It's always, I think, human beings in general are works in progress. You cannot say that this person is like the epitome of goodness or badness. you can't really say that. It's human beings will always be a work in progress. So all we can do is that we can strive to be better. Yes, we will make mistakes on the way. We will get into blunders. We might commit some sort of offenses and stuff. But then it's just, if you want to be better, if you want to be a better person, then yes, those things can be forgiven, I guess. But you have to be like inside inside, you need to be in that place where you want to be a better person. So only then can your transgressions be forgiven. Otherwise, you're just putting up a show for other people, and you
Mm.
don't really want to get better. You're just putting up a show, and that in that case, none of your transgressions can be forgiven.
And
So
honestly, when
yeah,
it comes to the point where you're making a show for other people, and even when an attitude like this gets normalized, I
yeah,
feel like people sort of get trapped in their own subjectivity. You know,
yeah,
you are
yeah,
individual and you do matter. That is, no one is discounting that,
yeah.
but there has to be a sort of tolerance towards opinions which you consider to be on the other side of the fence.
Hmm.
And I think this book
Absolutely.
actually does that quite well. Final
Oh, well,
question before
yeah, yeah.
I let you go. I was wondering if it was not too much trouble, could you read out just a small passage from the book?
Of course, I'd be happy to. So what I'm going to read is, I'm going to read from the very start. I mean, almost the first chapter. So I'm just going to start from there. Um, These were the workings of Shaitan, the Satan. Their leader had warned him about this. Shaitan will tempt him, try to deter him from the virtuous path to that of sin and cowardice. He must fight this. He trudged towards the ancient gate, the breeze drying beads of sweat that had erupted across his forehead. His hand slipped inside the shawl. Kill those Kafirs. An ice cream van approached. The gate to a house on his left opened. A woman emerged, carrying a small child in her arms. As the ice cream van blared the familiar tune that heralded happiness, lighting up the faces of children everywhere. He paused, waiting for the child to receive his ice cream. He thought the child deserved that much. Ismail watched him as he slurped it down, resting his head on the woman's shoulder. Possibly a son, he thought. Not so long ago, he had done the same. Rested his head on his mother's shoulder as his father came back from a hard day's work, smelling of sunshine and well earned sweat. Not so long ago, he had also been innocent, oblivious to everything happening around him, running alongside the ditches with his siblings, relishing the potent possibility of falling into the black muck. So filthy, but yet so exciting. Until they had bombed his village, killed his entire family while he brought back fried fish for dinner. Everything lost in a second. He remembered the polythene bag speckled with condensation, falling to the floor with a wet smack, the crusted fish sliding out on the floor. Slick with congealing blood, the floor wore the red color of shame, the shame of being branded terrorists in their own land. Steam issued from his family's still warm bodies, dissolving in the cold air. The head of his infant brother lay in the ditch, his eyes wide open in fear of question he couldn't tell. That was it. He couldn't take it anymore. He flicked open the plastic casing that protected the button and closed his eyes as his thumb punched it hard. Thank you so
You know,
much.
thank you so much, Awais. If I am allowed a final comment, which just occurred to me,
Yes.
it's, of course, this book, In the Company of Strangers, is on a surface level, it's about, it can be about violence and about brutality and all these things that probably gets readers. But I think the way that the conflict is expressed shows the internal struggle of good and evil in any individual. I think that is probably my favorite thing about the book. So thank you always so much for your
No,
time.
no. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Neil, for this wonderful discussion and for asking such intelligent questions. I don't know if I was intelligent enough to answer them, but I did my best.
I think it was more than good enough for us and for our listeners. Thank you so much, always, for your
Thank you
time
so much.
and
Thank
your
you.
thoughts. We will wind
Thank
up
you.
now. I'd just like to end with a quick reminder that Tell Me Your Story calls for submissions on the story prompt Homemakers. If your story is good enough, it may be published via Amazon. Registrations are also open for the Writing Program Season 3 in association with Simon and Schuster. Find the details for both on tellmeyourstory.biz. That's tellmeyourstory.biz. So I think that in our last three sessions, through Radhika, through Flavia, and now through Away, we explored homemaking popular in the popular sense that the word is understood. In a more conventional sense, we explored gender studies, we explored literal homemakers. And I think now when we started to talk about Western culture and religious orthodoxy, we started to move more into the genre of culture or entire communities which form a home space, form an internal logic within themselves. We sort of move from family to culture here. And I think from this point, we'll really start to expand the definition of homemakers. Our next session, which is on the 1st of September, is a panel discussion. A publisher from Penguin Random House, the senior commissioning editor of HarperCollins, and an editor from Pan Macmillan will join us. The panel topic for that is homemakers in popular literature, the rebellious, the rude, the strong, the significant. For now, of course, Awais and I will take your leave. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Awais.
No, no, my pleasure, Neil. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Stay well.
Take care.
Stay
See you. Bye.
to our listener. I'm Neil Nagwekar.